Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Aligning the Physical Infrastructure to Maximize Consolidation Outcomes, sponsored by Panduit. I'm Steve LeSueur, a contributing editor for Custom Media with the 1105 Government Information Group, publisher of FCW, GCN, Washington Technology, and Defense Systems magazines, and I will be your moderator today. And we have a very exciting presentation for you, but before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, today's webcast will be approximately an hour long. Near the end of the hour, our speakers will host a question and answer discussion. If at any time during the next hour you would like to submit a question, just look for the Ask a Question console, type in your question, and hit the Submit button. And I highly encourage you to ask as many questions as you like. Even if you don't have time to get to, or we don't have time to get to all of your questions during our program, our experts will respond via email to unanswered questions after our time expires. If you have any technical difficulties during the program, click on the Help button located below the slide window and you'll receive assistance. And here, let me also add that you can often solve technical problems by hitting the F5 function to refresh your console. In addition, when our presentation starts, you may want to push the Enlarge Slides button so you can comfortably read all of the slides. And if you would like a PDF copy of the presentation slides, you can push the Down button, also located below the slide window. And finally, after this session is completed, we will be emailing you a link to the archived version of this webcast so you can view the presentation again if you like, or share it with an interested colleague. And that brings us to today's webcast, looking at the physical foundation of the data center, and in particular, at how the physical foundation of the data center can be as critical as the logical infrastructure in optimizing performance and reducing operating costs when agencies consolidate their data centers. So we are very fortunate to have with us today two speakers who can address this issue. Our first speaker is Neil Shelley, who is the Civilian Deputy with the Army Data Center Consolidation. And Neil has prepared an excellent presentation, and so without further ado, let's turn the time over to him. Neil, are you ready to begin?
I am, sir. Thank you. As indicated, I'm Neil Shelley, and I'm involved with the Army's data center consolidation effort begun about 2 years ago. This afternoon I want to kind of walk you through what we're doing and how we're trying to achieve that consolidation. This is a little awkward environment for me. I'm used to having an audience in front of me and I can see the eyes and look at the yawns and adjust to the speaking to that feedback. Actually, the last time I did something like this, it was when I was 12 years old, and I got to talk about Draco the Dragon constellation. And that's in the days before Wikipedia, so you actually had to look all that stuff up in the Encyclopedia Britannica. The Army is a very complex data processing environment, perhaps one of the most complex in the world, extremely decentralized, and it was quite a thing to try to get our arms around. The first question that we get asked by a lot of folks is, what's your requirements? Ooh, here we go. Okay, there we go. What's your requirements document? And we're fortunate. We have direction from the President of the United States that says we need to begin consolidating data centers. We need to reduce the number of facilities, the footprint that's out there, and we have a number of goals as a result of that. Agencies have been required to submit to OMB on a regular basis both their initial plans and their performance to that plan. In fact, we're in the process right now of finalizing the latest results for FY12. The other reason that we're trying to do what we're doing is that there are a number of cost and security risks from having the kind of large-scale decentralized environment that we have. Happy to say that to this point, the Army has met every target date that's been set out by OMB. The Army is in a major modernization process for its systems. There's an ever-growing appreciation for what information systems can deliver. The operational commander has come to desire a control over those data processing assets at the most local level, and that creates a problem. General Lawrence, who is the Army's Chief Information Officer, made the statement that the Army's sweeping network modernization effort, in that effort, its number one priority in modernization, is going to require a fundamental cultural change. I can't emphasize that too much. The desire to have control over these resources is understandable, but it's probably the least effective and least cost-efficient manner of delivering service. Consolidating those operations in a smaller footprint is the best way that the Army can go to make improvements in how we deliver service to our soldiers. There has to be fundamental cultural change, and that's a tough thing to do. So talk to a little bit why we're doing data center consolidation. Then I want to talk to you a little bit more about, first off, what is a data center, how we're going about our discovery efforts to find out what's out there in the field, how we're looking at applications, because this is not just hardware, but it's also the applications that run on it, some efforts that we're making towards standardization of the environments. I want to give you my take on what the future state of data processing is going to be, how it's going to be handled, and then some lessons learned, some takeaways that you can have from us that we've picked up as we've moved along this path. There's some interesting things that we have picked up, and I'd like to share those with you. So what's a data center? Seems pretty easy. I think every person out there, when they say the term data center, probably has a vision in their mind. And I suspect when that vision was first put on paper, it was of a fairly large facility with rows and rows of racks, either neatly organized or with wires running in every direction. Some fluorescent lights overhead, some aisleways, but essentially a fairly large environment. In point of fact, that definition of a data center has dogged us because it just ain't so. The large, well or mediumly well organized data center is not the standard for the Army. A lot of our facilities, a great number of our facilities, are far smaller. The original guidance from OMB was received. The Army was really trying to get ahead of the curve, and it got its first data call out slightly, or just about the same time that OMB came out with a definition. Now, there was pretty much an agreement that every repository being used for data processing and storage should be classed as a data center. But the question was, how big was a data center? And at different points in time, it was 300 square feet, 500 square feet, 1,000 square feet. As a result of different interpretations of the XORs that we put out in the field and the changes in the size thresholds, a lot of the early discovery efforts came up with data centers or data processing facilities that in no way met the typical size that we would have expected. As you know, when there's opportunities for interpretation, Murphy's Law applies. So what we got in as a result of our data call was a broad range of facilities, anywhere from 25 square feet, essentially a closet, all the way up to thousands of square feet, which would be more what your classic data center might look like. As I mentioned, we got facilities smaller than 300 square feet. And we'd also made visible to us facilities that weren't what we would call general processing data centers. When you think of a data center, you think it might well be running things like email, or it might be supporting office operations. We found data centers that were actually doing binary collection of test data, crunching that data down into files, and then distributing those files to the folks who needed to have that information. Initially, the Army found about 250 data centers. And at that point, the Army committed to closing 185 of them. we aren't at 250 anymore. But the CIO believes that having a complete database of all of our data processing facilities would give us a better vision of what's really out there and would give us the opportunity to relook at how could we decrease the IT infrastructure and the application inventory, because we're tracking those as well. There are fiscal and operational efficiencies that we're expected to achieve, and without knowing what's out there, we wouldn't actually have a good chance of getting there. I was fielding a complaint earlier today from someone who was talking about why would they have to document all of the facilities that are there. But the point that I made to that individual was that every server, wherever it happens to be located, has at least one application running on it. It costs some money to run that, and it provides at least one point or another point at which there could be security issues that come into play. So knowing where all of those assets are is becoming a very important aspect of what we're doing. We're trying to find and document all of the places that we're processing data in the Army. This is the current OMB definition. I'll give you a few seconds to take a look at it. And as you do, I'll tell you that the words generally and, such as, we see as caveats. You don't have to have large storage systems, redundant or backup power supplies, those things that you mentioned there in order to be a data center. Essentially, you simply have to be processing and or storing data. Now, telecommunications closets were considered to be a part of this data collection process as well. And there has been a tendency in the Army, if you had a telecommunications closet, if you had that extra space there, it somehow would accrete other assets. So if you couldn't run it in your main data center, maybe you might put your file and prints shares there at that local telecommunications closet. It might run a little bit of data storage over there. So we're trying to get a handle over all of that information if we can. That definition was effective in March of this year. So really the definition of what is a data center is evolving over time. That's an important thing to remember, because as this thing changes, it may change the results in our database. The Army, pardon me just a second here, there we go. The Army began the goal of achieving 185 data center closures in 2015 back in 2011. We got a few closures in near the end of calendar year 10, but most of our closures started in 11. We decided to take an installation approach because in our initial efforts, what we were doing was sending discovery teams out to data centers scheduled for closure. So if, for example, Fort Knox had a data center scheduled for closure in 6 to 9 months, we'd put a team on site to assist that data center in working towards its closure. As a result, we discovered that we'd be going back out to that same installation on multiple occasions. We also discovered that while on site, talking to a particular data center, we might find out about other data centers in the area that we didn't have a record of. We decided to go to an installation approach in late fiscal year 2011 with the goal of finding out more about what was actually going on the entire installation. So our teams, when they go on to site, they're looking at the infrastructure across the entire facility, across the installation. You need to understand that with the Army, you don't have a single agent that owns all data centers. The Forces Command may own a data center on post. Netcom may own one or more data centers on an installation. Army Material Command may have another data center on that same installation. These are small cities, and they may have 4, 5, 6, or more data processing facilities on the installation run by separate organizations. And this is one of the things that we're trying to get our arms around. How do we reduce that down to a single facility per installation? So we're looking at what's there, what's the utilized capacity, and what might be the available capacity. What's the best facility on the post? We look at network and storage. We look at the application level data. What's being processed on that installation? Why at that particular installation? Is it something that perhaps could be processed at an enterprise level for use by other facilities in the Army? And we try to identify other data centers. I once told somebody that if you go on site, data center owners will rat out those that aren't known already, and that is only semi-jokingly. But the intent is to gather sufficient information on an installation so that the commands, multiple, can sit down and make informed decisions on which data centers should be closed and which data centers may stay open. Because, as I indicated, there may be special purpose facilities that have to stay open on a data center because you cannot, for various reasons, include them in that general purpose processing center. I like to say that we're in a business where light speed matters, and you very often can't perform an application remotely from where the action is actually occurring. For example, you don't run a high-speed lathe at hundreds of miles distance from the lathe itself. You lose a lot of blanks that way. So the goals of the installation approach is first to identify the best candidate that we can use to consolidate general purpose processing on the installation. It also gives us a chance to get all the commands on the installation motivated and maybe jumpstart the migrations, because we have a schedule for data center closure that leads us to at least 185 by fiscal year 15. But if there are gains to be made by closing earlier, and if we can use that installation approach to accelerate that process, then it's a gain for the Army. We also, like I said, have to identify facilities that may need to remain in operation. In the little graphic you see there, you're collapsing 3 facilities on an installation into a single location, and then you keep one open because it may have some special purpose that wouldn't make sense. I visited West Point, I guess last year, and I got to talking to them, and they gave me a perfectly good example. You really don't want students in your main data center mucking about with your server racks. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it would probably tighten up any data center owner who had that situation. So for educational purposes, you may need to keep a facility open where they train system administrators, for example. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at when we go on to a facility. So what have we learned? Well, we have well over 500 data centers in our portfolio. Remember, I told you that back in 2010, we thought we had our arms around it. We had 250 data centers. Based on our database, we know that there's over 1.2 million square feet of raised floor space or overhead cable tray ready space, which is being used today by the Army. There's over 27,000 physical servers. Somebody asked me why we track physical servers, and the answer is you sure don't want to have to track virtual servers if you don't know how many physical ones that you have. It's too volatile. If you put those 10,000 racks that we've identified side by side, based on my back-of-the-envelope calculations, you'd have a row that's about 4 miles long. We're still looking at applications or counting applications. Our database identifies every application that we know of and every location that application runs. It isn't complete, we know that, but we're doing our best to get our arms around the whole thing. The one of the problems that we have as we look at data center consolidation is that the metric at this point is closed data centers. At the same time, we're trying to retire applications. We're trying to consolidate them at enterprise level. But if I retire half of the applications out of a data center, I don't have a closed data center necessarily. So at that point, I still have an open data center. We have to get that data center emptied and those applications either running somewhere else or retired for good reason before we can get that data center closed. And that's the thing that we aim for. Okay, there we go. Our goal is to simplify the inventory. Well, first off, to document it, but secondly, then, to simplify that inventory. And we're doing that through three basic means. We're using rationalization of our applications. We're consolidating our facilities, and we're trying to standardize the platforms on which we operate. And when we talk about that, we're talking about having locations that we can put applications or move applications from one location to another and keep that as simple as possible. And I'm going to talk to each of these in turn. Application rationalization is the one I want to talk to first. We break our applications down into three basic bins. We have a warfighting mission area. Very clearly, you can imagine the kind of applications that go there. We have a business mission area, and we have enterprise information mission area. So we have three different mission areas, or different portfolios, if you will, each of which has a manager who specializes in that particular area. And as we have identified the applications across the Army, those have been binned into one of those three areas. As you can imagine, some of them are easy. The bulk of them, in fact, are probably easy to put into different bins. But there is some negotiation across the different portfolios as to whether an application belongs in that area or not. That's a process that's ongoing. We've made a great deal of progress there. There's still a few more, and of course it's a continuing process. We may identify a data center when we do an installation discovery or a data processing location where there is an application running that we just flat didn't know about. And of course that information is then reported through us back up to the portfolio managers with a suggestion of where they might be binned, and then that's sorted out. Once you have these things binned, you go through a rationalization process. That's something else that's ongoing right now. There are basically three things that we want to do with an application. We've got kill there. You want to retire the application. If it's no longer needed to do business, if it's no longer mission critical, we want to retire that application. We don't want to be running it anymore. If it's something which we can modernize and virtualize it, put into a better environment to operate it, then we want to do that. That includes looking at the spectrum of related applications and trying to identify the best, the prettiest flower, if you will, the one that is best suited to cover more areas. Back in the 1990s, there was a saying, we said we wanted to let 1,000 flowers grow. And there were plenty of folks out there in a very decentralized environment who developed software. The process then was to energize these folks into developing these applications, and we would pick from amongst them. Unfortunately, what generally happened was that applications got developed and they continue to operate. They were developed for unique purposes and continue to operate to serve the unique needs of the local installation. That was fine, but as we have grown and more applications have been developed, it's time to start looking at those that are similar and see if we can't retire the ones which aren't the most capable and retain the one which will meet the most needs, and then adjust it to broaden its scope. The last category that we rationalize into is sustain. And that would be an application that has a successor on deck, if you will, something that's being developed. And we'll sustain that as a legacy application until it can be either killed or modernized into a different environment. So that's the three areas there. As we go on, we are going to be deciding where those applications are going to land. They may well be enterprise applications. They run at some level above the installation at which other installations can access them. The deputy CIO likes to talk about being at the bottom of a soda straw. With narrow bandwidth going to an installation, it makes no sense to run enterprise applications at local installation level. It makes a lot more sense to put them up at the enterprise level so that the bandwidth that's available there will allow the customer access to them. We want to take advantage of commercial opportunities. That's something that is being considered. It's been directed by Congress for us to look at it. And of course, you've got the local level where applications would run in support of the local installation. Again, light speed sometimes matter. Maybe you don't want to run thin client at an enterprise level because of the response time that you get on it. So it's dependent upon what you're trying to do. Okay. Now, let's assume for the moment that you took a snapshot of all 17,000 applications, and instantly you were able to bin them, and you were able to make a decision as to what you were going to do with them in the long run. You got a problem. That was a snapshot at that moment in time, and people continue to develop applications out in the field. So they may be developing things that you already have a handle on and you already have an enterprise solution for. So the Army is looking at changing its business processes to empower the mission area leads so that they are able to help us control application growth. Very often, and I suspect it happens in the civilian sector as well, you have something developed to meet a unique need, and the folks at the top only find out about it after it's already producing. And money's been spent, and the question is asked of you, are you really going to kill this? It's doing some useful things for us. Was it the right answer for the organization? Maybe, maybe not. But what we're going to be doing is looking at our connection to the network process, or CON process, so that the mission areas get a chance to get a look at these proposed applications before we actually spend any significant amount of money in developing and putting them into operation. The hope is that they can steer people who have needs to something that's already there, and if necessary, make modifications to existing applications, which is significantly cheaper than it would be to develop an application and field it from scratch. So we're making changes to our business processes to enable us to get a better control over what gets fielded out there, and to limit things which may or may not be which may not be needed. As far as consolidation options, we look at four possibilities. The first we call forklifting, and essentially that's actually moving the server or the application intact to another location. That's frowned upon. But quite frankly, it's the quickest way to close a data center, and it's absolutely the quickest way to get a culture change. Because once that command understands that it doesn't have to have that application running under its thumb and gets used to the idea of receiving services rather than controlling operations, you've made a significant change to how they do business, a significant culture change. Infrastructure as a service is something that is offered to some extent in the Army already, and something that we want to be looking at. These are standard industry definitions, so I'm not going to try to explain them to you. Platform as a service is something that the Army and the other DoD components are getting into at this point. It certainly has advantages for us. And then there's software as a service. Something that, I don't know if that's the holy grail or the potential for the greatest savings, but it is one of the harder things to actually get implemented. So how well have we done? What about our consolidation efficiencies? By however means we've been using them. At this point, we've closed 51 of the goal of 85 data centers. Our goal is to reach that by the end of FY 2015. So we're doing okay. I'd like to be doing a little bit better, but we're doing okay. In 2012, we've closed 25 data centers out of the 41 that we expected. I was looking at the statistics this morning, or the numbers this morning. Our biggest problem is getting what we call a valid closure report. And we require that with the closure report, the data center owner report the efficiencies that were gained, and that report be signed by a general officer or a member of the senior executive service. Essentially, they're putting on the table the savings that they have gained so that can be collected and used for other IT purposes in the Army. Getting a closure is easier than getting a formal closure report sometimes. But looks like from what I've seen that this year we will at least get the 41 planned data center closures. In fact, we've got 6. We're just waiting for the signed report. We have discovered about 17,000 applications. The portfolio managers have validated, right now it's about 13,000 of those applications. We've required 577 of them. We've eliminated 278 servers, and you can see the floor space that's been released. Our estimated efficiencies gained about $11 million, and exclusive of that, there's almost $200,000 worth of energy savings. These are real numbers, and I will guarantee you that the folks in the field, when they send in a report, are conservative on what they think that they have saved. So, talked a little bit about information as a service. That is getting those enterprise server operating environments in place. We see that as a significant advantage to have in our toolbox, especially when you're moving legacy servers around. Enterprise server common operating environments, the PaaS environments. Having something that's pre-stigged allows the application to inherit the security of everything below itself. Most of the security that you need for that application can be inherited, which simplifies considerably getting that application accredited and operational. These are things that we're into. We're working. I won't tell you that it's operating the way that you may have seen old movies of the Ford assembly lines with a Model T rattling off the end about every few minutes. We aren't there yet. We're more in the one-off environment at this point, but it's something that we're aiming for. Of course, the benefits of having a smaller set of environments is that we can focus on those sets and build better security for them. We can also talk to our developers. I know it ain't so, but a lot of the vendors would prefer to develop in an environment that they are familiar with rather than an environment that we establish. What we're hoping to do is to say, here's the development environment that you have to target. Now let's meet the requirement within that environment. It certainly simplifies deployment on demand. It allows us to more rapidly scale both up and down. I mean, there are times of the year where an application owner wants to have significantly more storage and processing power than other times of the year. And that, when it's implemented and fully operational, will give us the opportunity to utilize our servers to the greatest degree possible. We have right now, and that's the challenge, over 27,000 uniquely configured servers. Some of them running more than one application, virtualized, some running a single application, but every one of them, I think, unique. The other big challenge is that migration is neither free nor instant. And that's a hard message to take to senior leadership because, in fact, at one point, we were advised it would be good if we closed the largest data centers first because we'd get more efficiencies out of that. That's not ignorance. That's simply enlightened desire of what they would like to do. Again, migrations, as you know, are neither free nor instant. I can't emphasize that anymore. So our real grail, if you will, is software as a service. One of the things, and you might not think about this, is it allows the Army to use operations and maintenance funds. And those are significantly easier to get than what are known as procurement funds, the capital, if you would, capital investment type funds. We do use software as a service. The Army Enterprise email system, which is underway as we speak, the conversion to it, we're getting those services from DISA, and I believe they crossed the 500,000 account threshold just this week. So 500,000 Army customers get their email from enterprise services provided by somebody other than the Army, and that's a significant event. We're looking at collaboration services as another place where we might use enterprise services, and we're going to continue to look at other opportunities to work with the other components and get enterprise services within DoD. This is Shelley's interpretation because none of this is locked down yet. There are probably going to wind up being 4 levels of processing. There are going to be a small number of high-performance enterprise servers that will host both component unique and enterprise services for DoD at large. They will be scattered around CONUS and possibly OCONUS. At the next level down, you'll find at the installation level a single data center per installation that will provide general purpose services. And there are some examples there, print, VoIP. I wouldn't be surprised to see thin client for response purpose or response time there. Some installation unique, maybe safety and security applications. Of course, we have tactical and mobile facilities, which will have to be treated somewhat differently because they go into operation in the field, but they also have to come back to home station at some point and be refreshed, and the soldiers have to continue to be trained on those facilities. The last are the special purpose facilities, and I've touched on those earlier. Those are the kind of things that support laboratories and test ranges, manufacturing, education. Those are the special purpose facilities where you cannot centralize them easily. In fact, you may not want to. You may have a high-risk test lab where there is actual physical danger with people being in the area, so you simply keep your server operations remote to that particular facility. This is a notional state. 4, 5, 6 years down the pike, this may well be the kind of organizational structure that you find data processing operating in. And some takeaways. I already said it. Technology is not the hardest part of the job. It's the politics and the culture of dealing with the folks who are used to owning those resources, having control over those resources, and being able to yank the leash of the person who runs them for them. So culture is a key factor. For that reason, it's important to have solid executive sponsorship, and you got to have some capitalization when you go into this thing. If you go in poor, you're going to get poor-mouthed. So you got to be careful about that. We thought about operations and technology when we went into it, and what we found was some of our biggest problems involve business, finance, and acquisition. You've got to have a team which has skill sets in all of those areas. If you don't have standardized terminology, you got problems. There's an old saying for debaters, and it says, "He who defines terms wins." And if you don't have a standard terminology, you're just going to be talking past each other. That's something that constantly dogs us and something that you need to think about as you go into one of these things. Start out multi-pronged. I mean, you're more likely to hit the target. Be flexible. There's the old joke, well, it works in practice, but will it work in theory? Be willing to change your approach to attacking the problem based on what you learn from your prior progress. You will. What you think you got when you start out is not what you're going to have as you get into the project. Make sure, sometimes there's a tendency to shoot the messenger. Make sure that you recognize the folks who are really playing with you, who are really trying to make this thing go forward. Celebrate their successes and make sure you congratulate them publicly. I've seen instances where people come in and they get whacked simply because of the first person up on the podium, and they're bringing a message is not what leadership wants to hear. Recognize those folks who are really playing and work with them. The quality and accuracy of your database is key. If you don't have good data, you're not going to make good decisions. And lastly, data center consolidation is not easy, and anybody that's looking for a silver bullet is fooling themselves. So make sure that your leadership understands there's no easy answer to this. That's me, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Steve.
Hey, thank you very much, Neil. That was a great presentation. And let me again remind our audience, if you would, we'll be answering questions at the end of our broadcast, so keep those questions coming in. And now I'd like to introduce our second speaker for today's event, Andy Chalupka. And Andy is Data Center Solutions Marketing Manager for Panduit. So, Andy, the time is all yours.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Neil. That sounds like you have quite a challenge in front of you. And what I'd like to speak about today is how Panduit can help other people that are planning or in the midst of a consolidation product, how we can help them be more successful to that. And I'd probably like to draw a little finer point on what I'm going to talk about. Neil gave a good overview at a very high and strategic level. And I kind of want to talk about something that is maybe not as important as the overall strategy, but it is a component of a data center that sometimes gets overlooked to disastrous results, and that is the physical infrastructure. So by way of introduction, I'm with the Panduit Corporation, and since 1955, the company has grown from a manufacturer of wire protection devices and cable straps to a company that's providing or has become a world-class developer of leading-edge solutions that address higher-level business problems across three areas of business: the data center, connected buildings or the enterprise, and industrial automation. And generally what we aim to do with our, now it's not just a collection of individual components, but solution elements, is help reduce the risk associated with building or consolidating a data center, ensuring that a data center in particular can be agile by ensuring that it has the ability to scale or expand rapidly and efficiently, or even has provision for the appropriate amount of bandwidth. And then also look at how to improve the operational efficiency of a data center. just to give you a quick overview of the different solution elements that we attempt to combine into solutions that will address higher level problems like a data center consolidation. We really looked at the process through the whole life cycle of a data center. So we kind of broke it down for simplicity's sake into a planning phase, a design phase, a deployment phase, and an operate phase, or the ongoing operation of a data center. And we started putting together solution elements to address challenges that our customer base faces as they're entering through those various phases. And they range from services. The first one up there is our professional advisory services. We try to help our customers, possibly our customers that are involved in a consolidation project, understand what are the where are they now in terms of their power availability, in terms of cooling capacity, how are they going to optimize the use of the space that they have, particularly after you've consolidated multiple data centers into one, to helping our customers manage these consolidated data centers after they've been resized, rebuilt, or built new through our integrated or intelligent software and hardware options. They help our customers understand how their data center assets are being loaded, where their data center assets are, and even help our customers understand how often data centers are being changed. And some of our software and hardware solution elements can help manage that process more efficiently. We spend a lot of time understanding how to optimize energy efficiency of data centers. And also, as people start to deploy the data center, we look at ways of reducing the time it takes to assemble these literally thousands of small parts that you need in order to ensure that your signal is being transmitted efficiently and reliably. We do that by offering products that are either pre-configured or allow you to eliminate some of the more costly but less value assembly steps, such as terminating fiber optic cables or copper cables within the data center. Another key element of our solution is high-speed data transport. We offer a range of cabling and connectivity that can handle transmission rates in the OM4 range, and handle and provide the bandwidth that's required for these environments that become virtualized and then ultimately feed cloud type applications. And then we also pay attention to some of the things that traditionally aren't really focused on, such as the cable trays, such as grounding and bonding, and even labeling. Again, these all contribute to increased reliability, agility within the data center, and space management. So there's several types of consolidation challenges. Big one is reducing the risk and the cost of a data center consolidation. As I mentioned before, beyond the rationalization of applications and servers, there are a lot of moving parts involved with the physical infrastructure. So challenges relate to how you might try to map the logical architecture to a physical infrastructure. What's the best way of deploying the equipment that you're now consolidating? Managing the consolidation process. There's a project management aspect to that. How is that going to be organized, and how are responsibilities going to be assigned, and how is the material going to be brought in a manner and a time frame that's going to lead to the most efficient deployment. Other things to consider as you try to reduce this complexity is how are you going to reduce the risk of service if you're consolidating smaller nodes into a larger node? And how are you going to accommodate the power requirements and the cooling that you would need as more equipment is being consolidated into a data center? The challenge of merging redundant capabilities and facilities play out in terms of what type of network architecture are you going to be implementing? How will you manage the remote sites that you might create? I know Neil referenced the fact that not all of the assets or the applications in a given data center can be moved, but they still need to be monitored and maintained. And how are you going to ensure that this consolidated data center is going to be able to support the new equipment densities that may be implemented within them? That usually relates to power and cooling, but it also relates to being able to provide the adequate amount of bandwidth. In short, there's a greater reliance being placed on the physical infrastructure. That's being driven by higher densities and higher capacity equipment and the need to be able to ensure that you're providing power and cooling and connectivity in a reliable manner. So how can Panduit help with consolidation efforts? Again, as we look at the planning phase, we offer a range of what we call advisory services, where you can start with an assessment of your power and cooling, an assessment of what type of space will be required for your consolidated data center. Also, the capability to understand what your logical network is and then map out and create a plan for a physical infrastructure, and also leverage some of the partner alliances with technology companies that Panduit has to ensure that as you're deploying a certain type of technology, you're also deploying it in a physical infrastructure that can optimize the performance of a Nexus switch or a Juniper fabric type architecture. We also participate in the design phase. Again, there's a service offering where we can build upon our assessments and provide an actual design that you can build off of the physical infrastructure. We also build these off of reference architectures and designs that we've established that really embody best practice ways of deploying cabinets and thermal management devices and overhead pathways and cabling and connectivity. We can also assist in terms of the deployment. Do this in multiple levels. One level is to actually help manage the installation of the physical infrastructure in a data center. Also provide pre-configured cabinets that reduce the time required to assemble these elements and reduce the time that it takes to plan and procure and specify all the individual components that might go into a cabinet, or even expand that to a pod, which is multiple cabinets. And we can break this down to an even smaller level where we have pre-terminated cable assemblies that can minimize the time required for specialized technicians or contractors to come in and terminate a cable and ensure that the cable is tested and operating And we can expand this to the operation cycle as well. And that it can be looked at as best practices where we have the background to define and help you deploy labeling schemes that will make the moves, adds, and changes within a data center more efficient and help you track down assets easier. Software, again, to do a whole host of things from monitoring assets, monitoring environmental conditions within the data center within the cabinet, and also software that helps you plan capacity and helps you create a better way of utilizing the power and cooling capacity that you have already invested in. And that concludes my quick overview, and I'd like to open up the call to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. And so, Andy and Neil, we've already got some great questions in here. And so, though Neil, nothing yet on Draco the Dragon.
Correct.
We'll keep waiting.
Yeah.
But we've got a question here. A questioner asks, who incurs the cost for testing the system when migrating?
Well, that's dependent. We use System Engineering Corp. SEC, which is a sub-element of the CCOM up at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. They're our partners, and we use them for installation discovery and for migration, to assist in migration of applications. In the end, that cost is borne by the application owner and / the command. These are decentralized applications, and the process of migrating them cannot be borne solely by the CIG6. So the command is expected to cover much of that cost. Now, please note that as they close a data center, they retain any funds that were allocated for that data center during that year. And what we hope is that they make an effort to get that data center closed as early in that year as possible by utilizing funds which were programmed for the rest of the year. So it's a decentralized process. Much of the cost is on the command.
Yeah. All right. Terrific. Well, let's see, Andy. We've got a question for you here. The questioner asks, what are the key physical infrastructure considerations when planning a data center consolidation?
So that's going to depend on what you're doing. If you're building a new data center and you're going to relocate equipment, probably the biggest consideration are the logistics behind that. And the key logistic there is making sure that the physical infrastructure is in place and ready to accept the relocated assets. If you're adding more equipment or more applications to an existing data center, probably the key consideration is to have a good understanding of what your existing data center can handle in terms of additional power that would be required, additional cooling that would be required, and additional bandwidth that may be required. An example of this might be the implications of adding a pre-configured cloud device, whether something along the lines of a vBlock, for instance. That draws a certain amount of power. It has a certain cooling profile, and let's just say, for the sake of this description, that it has an average cooling load of 10 kilowatts in a single cabinet. And you put it into an environment that's set up for 2 to 5 kilowatts per cabinet, you now have the potential for a problem that could lead to either A, the new equipment overheating, or B, you turning up the cooling in the entire data center and in effect overcooling 80 to 90% of your data center to accommodate this new piece of equipment. So It's really gaining an understanding of what you can bring into an existing data center and what the impact is, and then how to design or plan around that efficiently.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Andy. Well, I'm sorry to say that that's all the time that we have this afternoon, but I would like to thank Andy and Neil for your very informative presentations today, and also for taking the time to answer those questions that came in. And I also want to give a special thanks to Panduit for sponsoring today's event. It's really interesting information here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if we didn't get to your question, and there were a few we didn't get to, don't worry. We will be emailing answers to all unanswered questions we received today. And then also in the next day or two, we will be emailing you a link to an archived version of the webcast so you can view the presentation again if you like, or as I mentioned earlier, share it with an interested colleague. Thank you very much for attending today's webcast, and this concludes our presentation.